Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of BSN's A Long Story Short. Today, we are focusing on how technology, and specifically blockchain technology, is having an impact on the apparel industry. The two keywords of the day will be transparency and sustainability, two important factors in bridging trust with global consumers. Joining me for this discussion are Amit, who is the CEO and co-founder at TextileGenesis, along with Stephanie and Phil from the fashion marketplace Queen of Raw. Before we jump in, just a quick reminder that in the description below, you can find all the important information, such as the Twitter at BSN Base. You can also search on LinkedIn and view the BSN website. So why don't we kick this discussion, by letting our panelists give a short introduction about themselves, give the audience some context. How does that sound? Why don't we start with Stephanie today?
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We're thrilled to be here. My name is Stephanie Benedetto, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Queen of Raw. I actually come from a family background of over 100 years in fashion and textiles in New York City. So what we're here to talk about is very near and dear to my heart and to what we do personally and professionally. And I always thought how powerful fashion, textiles, supply chains were, where they connect people all over the globe, but always disliked all the waste it produced, right? All that unused raw materials and finished goods, because that stuff is bad for people and planet, but it's also bad for a business's profit. So we built a solution. We are a marketplace with integrated supply chain software so that businesses, small to large, can find all this waste in their supply chains, market it and sell it, turn it into profit, and keep it out of landfill. And we're thrilled to be here. We've saved over 1 billion gallons of water to date. We're just getting started.
That's an awesome story, Stephanie, and I love your attitude on the issue. Are you, just for reference, are you the Queen of Raw, or was the name picked up for someone else?
No, we want to empower everyone to be the kings and queens of their domain, right? And it's a name you're not going to forget. So my co-founder, Phil, and I came up with it, and we stuck with it, and it served us well. So we had fun with it.
Okay, why don't we have Phil jump in there and add a few comments about himself or things he'd like to add?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Ben. I'm Phil Derasmo. I'm the CTO and co-founder at Queen of Raw. And similar to Stephanie, my family had a background over in the textile industry. My whole mom's side of the family, with the exception of my mom, actually worked over in the textile factories over in Lower New York back in the day. And so I had I have these fond memories of walking through the factories as a child, and when I was younger, getting my first pair of pants or my first suit jacket. And I remember literally being, in the factory, looking around over on the shop floor and seeing all of the excess materials strewn about everywhere, piled on top of tables everywhere, and packed, piled up in the corners. And so when I first met Stephanie, and she was telling me about this problem that she saw, she was manufacturing a sustainable textile and saw that there was no more need for people to manufacture necessarily additional sustainable textiles, because there was so much great material out there already. Over $120 billion a year at the time, which has grown to more than double that, was being burned, buried, wasted, collecting dust over in warehouses. So when she told me about this problem, I was like, wow, I'm like, here we are, 2 decades later, the problem still exists, and it's not even, it's not even a national thing, it's a global issue. And it really struck me and resonated with me. So I have a background I worked in Wall Street for over 10 years. So we were dealing with high security, high transactional data being shared globally from multiple different stakeholders. And that kind of really, was kind of what I brought to the table, is being able to go and connect all these disparate sources of data that were all different versions and have everybody collaborate together, which kind of brought us over to using blockchain, which seemed like a great solution in terms of using that tool basically, and the technology, in order to securely go and collaborate data in an immutable way with high integrity.
Amazing. And how is the jump in from Wall Street to the fashion industry? Has it been a breath of fresh air, or do you still feel like you're hanging out with the wolves?
Well, I loved working on Wall Street because I learned so much from so many, great, talented people, experts in the industry. Being able to learn from those folks and then bring that back over to the startup world in creating new innovative products was absolutely priceless.
Awesome. All right, let's jump to our third panelist today. Last but not least, Amit, do you want to give us a quick breakdown?
Sure. So I'm Amit Gautam, CEO and founder of TextileGenesis. Essentially, we are a blockchain-based supply chain traceability platform. We invented what we call Fiber Coin, which is a digital token for every kg of sustainable fiber at the point of origin. And as the fiber is transformed into yarn, fabric, different tiers in the supply chain, those tokens are passed along following the flow of goods, creating a complete digital traceability in a very complex, highly fragmented global supply chains, right? And what we are trying to solve is what we call 95% traceability gap in the fashion industry. What we mean by that is majority of top 100 fashion brands, right, which collectively drive about $1 trillion USD sales, have set 100% sustainable and traceable fibers target by 2025. I think great vision, great ambition. But if you ask a second question, what percentage of the same top 100 fashion brands can track their sustainable collections across the entire 5 to 6 tiers where the raw material is created across the full supply chain? Less than 5%. So 95% of the same top 100 brands have very limited to no visibility beyond tier 1, right? Sometimes perhaps they understand the finished fabric supplier, but when you get to grades fabric, who's spinning the yarn, who's actually producing the fabric going back to the farm, or a recycled material source like what Stephanie is driving in terms of collection of the vessels, very little visibility, right? So that's what we are addressing at TextileGenesis. Now, prior to starting this, I was leading the global fashion textile business at Lenzing, which is an innovation leader in the fashion out of Austria and Hong Kong, driving sales, marketing, and new innovations. That was a business of close to 1.5 billion euros. And prior to that, about 10 years in Amsterdam and Switzerland, working with McKinsey and World Economic Forum, helping companies around sustainability, commercial excellence, right? But not just in the apparel. Yeah, I was kind of a typical consultant dabbling in agricultural industry, in renewable energy, a bit all over the place. But I would say last 6 to 7 years have primarily focused on fashion, textile, apparel, retail. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Could you maybe share how you seem to be quite familiar with our other two panelists? How have you met them before?
Yeah, so I think we, Stephanie, just remind me. I think
we got connected. Lenzing is an incredible partner and friend of ours in New York City, and we work very closely with their team. And when they heard what we were doing and what we're building, they just thought it was a natural connection to make to support each other.
Correct. And I think perhaps in 2018, I was at the PI Apparel conference in New York. Yes. And I think you were on one of the panel, Stephanie, and I was one of the speakers there. So that's when it started. And Lenzing, of course, has a good presence in New York with Tricia in their office. And then I think we had a couple of calls, and I really enjoy and like the work that you guys are doing. Yeah.
Feelings mutual.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad we're all on the same page, and that will make things a lot easier. For my job, I won't have to break up any fights, hopefully. So why don't we start by just kind of laying out, the critical issues that we're seeing within the fashion industry today. I think that's a good starting point for everybody. Maybe, Stephanie, you seem itching to go. Why don't you go ahead and lead off?
Happy to. Obviously for this industry, it's been quite a unique time in history, but of course in that a massive opportunity, right? Through the pandemic and even before that, with trade wars, with shipping delays, China, California, you name it, globally, right? This industry, I think, is crying out for an opportunity to rebuild and refashion these supply chains. And we're kind of experiencing a crisis of supply. More unused inventory than ever before, right? Because of all those shipping delays, canceled orders, closed stores, huge returns, and missed seasons and collections. When we started looking at this issue, Phil and I quantified it at $120 billion a year of unused stuff that sits in warehouses or gets burned or buried. Through the pandemic, we now have seen it's well over $288 billion a year and growing. So, I think this issue of waste is a powerful place for businesses to start looking at how they can rebuild and rethink their supply chains, right? It gives you opportunities. And the reason we've keyed in early on to this waste issue is you take this waste, you can monetize it, right? You can sell it and then take all the money that you make and put it back into doing good work in your supply chain. You can pay your workers more. You can digitize more parts of your supply chain. You can use more sustainable fibers, right? Without your overall CapEx expenditure going up. And I think those are the kinds of innovative thinkings and solutions we need in order to get the change and the adoption we need as an industry. The other note that I will make is looking at kind of where supply chains have been and where they're going. I think for fashion in particular, things before the pandemic were operating at such a fast pace, right? More, faster, sell. And it got to a point that it literally was unsustainable. And it kind of took a pandemic for us to slow down and think, how does this make sense economically as well as for people and planet, right? Especially when you have all this waste that's hurting your bottom line up to 15% or more in a year. So I think the future supply chain and what we're seeing businesses going into is going to be one that is more on demand, more local and more sustainable because it makes economic sense. It's what our consumers are demanding. It's what people care about now, and it's going to help drive that bottom and top line.
Fantastic. Anyone want to jump in there and add on to that?
No, I think Stephanie has captured it quite well, right? So I would just say that I think in the next, what pandemic has done is really caused some fundamental shifts in the way brands are going to source their collections, in the way they are going to market, right? I think sustainability as an idea was somewhere in the corporate ladder, but now it's actually the top priority, right? The second fundamental shift I see is that traceability and sustainability are becoming very, very deeply interconnected, right? They were seen as separate things, but now you realize these are two sides of the same coin, right? It's not possible for any brand to make any credible sustainability claim without underpinning it with traceability, right? If you say that, look, this material, this collection is from waste, post-industrial waste or post-consumer waste, right? Or this particular collection is with sustainable material, how do you prove that it is indeed true? And the only way to be able to do that is have a very strong traceability backbone, right? So I always say that traceability and sustainability are two sides of the same coin. And you cannot take those two concepts out of each other, because sustainability without traceability is a lot of hot air, which blows up very soon the moment you start challenging it, right? Mm-hmm. And traceability without sustainability has no value, because you do not want to be just focused on commodity products. If you're just tracing commodity products, very little value that you can create from that, right? So that is one really, I would say, significant shift I see. And then second is the brands are becoming increasingly really serious. These targets that I talked about, 100% sustainable fibers next 5 years, these targets are announced by the CEO and the board of these brands, right? Not the targets announced by, at a annual investor meeting to their shareholders, to their employees, to their suppliers. And I think they would have to deliver on it, because there's no way going back. And what we would see is it's almost impossible to think about any business strategy from any brand where sustainability and traceability is not core to what these guys are doing. Yeah.
And I think to add on to that, Ben, another a really important shift that we're presently seeing. We're in the midst of a new industrial revolution, basically, that has been powered by the affordability and accessibility of technology, in particular blockchain, AI, affordable hosting. Folks can go and spin up just on their own for practically free with some trial type memberships and stuff like that, and or for pennies or dollars, they can go and spin up their own infrastructure now. They don't need to have a dozen network administrators and infrastructure folks building their servers, which would take weeks or months Now they can just like push a button and now they have a server running, and within a matter of 20, 30 minutes, they can go and spin up their own blockchain nodes and start building and immediately start creating contracts on their network. Whereas like that kind of thing before, they couldn't even, how would you even get access to the infrastructure, to the servers? You'd have to go and build a box yourself, not much more than 10 or so years ago. Now it's so quick, and AI and machine learning also is very affordable. You can have it as a service where you spin it up immediately, or you can even run it on your laptop and start coding immediately. And these are really important. The affordability of hosting, the ability to go and transmit large sums of data around the world very quickly with the bandwidth that is merging throughout the globe now globally, whereas before it was just centralized. These things are playing a very important shift in our technology and the accessibility to technology, so folks can innovate. Because when you have companies that are focused on building their products, for the most part, with the exception of a few lucky few that have the ability to diversify or have the capabilities to have their own technology departments, for the most part, these companies they're already overwhelmed trying to go and get the best product they can out to their customers and sell through on that and follow through on that. Never mind deal with all this waste and all this excess.
So that's amazing. Yeah, I always like to follow up, on the question. So just listening on what all of you said there, it's quite interesting about what Stephanie mentioned, a return to like the localization. I think people from maybe half a generation ago, witnessed kind of the death of localization, and everything moved to outsource and, big manufacturing and big retail. So, I mean, do you believe that technology is bringing this return to localization, or do you think it's actual consumer demand for the technology pulling it back in?
It has to be both and more, right? I mean, the only way that going on demand and local and sustainable makes sense for a business, especially an enterprise corporation, is if it makes economic sense. And the only way it's going to make economic sense is if it does something to their bottom and or their top line. And I think that's a position that, we've spent a lot of time looking at the ROI calculations in our software and tools. How much time and resources are we saving and making for our customers? Because that's when you're going to get, right, the demand. And I think for so long that B word blockchain, just like the S word sustainability, right? It means a lot of things to a lot of people, but it almost seemed very costly, hard to do, and time consuming for a while for people to participate. They wanted to, but they didn't know how. Where do you go and what do you do on day one? And I think that's what Phil was speaking about, right? Is this movement to democratizing access to resources. That's what, we're doing. Our marketplace, democratizing access to these technologies. That's what all of us here, Amit, and our team is working on building. Those are the movements that make economic sense, that will also get that widespread adoption. And you need it from the top down and the bottom up in order to have that real movement happen.
Anyone want to follow up there before we move to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I think the localization is already happening, or I would say sometimes nearshoring, right? Because the labor cost still plays a very important role for tier one. If you look at cut and sew operations, so unless and until you bring a lot of automation and robots into cutting and sewing operations, that labor arbitrage would continue to play. But nearshoring, right? Maybe instead of getting all the way from China, you actually source it more from South America, Europe sourcing a lot more from Turkey versus again sourcing from Far East, right? But the processes in between, right? I mean, when you look at the recycling itself, or if you look at some of the intermediate processes, you might see a certain revival in certain pockets around that. I think I would say U.S. cotton industry is seeing a bit of a renaissance given the challenges around cotton traceability, and we're working with the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol to create traceability for U.S. cotton for different brands. So I think you would start seeing, perhaps very difficult to say, local sourcing for everything, but you will start seeing pockets springing up, right? And create new ecosystems of innovation, because there's a lot of work also happening in material innovation, right? Fundamental innovation around how can I use waste to create new fibers, bringing biotechnology into that, bringing agricultural waste into it. And a lot of that innovation is actually in Europe and US at the very beginning of the raw materials. Yeah.
You know, it's also interesting. I mean, you kind of started talking about it, but I think there is a role being played by policy and government for sure. Yeah. It's just one piece of it. But in addition to what we were talking about, the top down and the bottom up demand, we've seen a lot of the changes in the laws, especially in Europe, but also in the US and now coming in Asia too, around waste and resources and circularity. We joined with H&M, Unilever, and Cisco in the New York Circular City Initiative, backed by government, and produced a white paper showing what was interesting about it is showing how many good jobs can be created and how much money can be saved and made by New York City changing the laws and going circular in the coming years. And it kind of wrote a blueprint for what those case studies would be based a lot on Europe and other parts of the world. What would it mean to change that in those laws? But most importantly, it isn't just about slapping businesses with millions of dollars in liability on the books. How can they use solutions like TextileGenesis, like Queen of Raw, and our software Materia MX in order to be able to offset that coming legal liability, right? And have a record and a proof of the good work they did, the impact that it's had on the world, and do better all around. And when it's a win-win-win for people, planet, profit, right? How do you say no to that?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I think we should jump into the blockchain part of the talk because we are, after all, the blockchain service network. So I'm curious, maybe you could talk a little bit about your companies and then how they're using blockchain. It's be particularly interested in like how you arrived at the decision to use blockchain. So that could be a good topic for maybe Amit or obviously Phil from the technical aspect to take a stab at.
Yeah, I would say from a very high level perspective, you have this data all around the world, right? It's a global problem. The supply chain is global, right? You have supplies everywhere throughout the world, and you have multiple stakeholders from different areas. Some folks are part of your company, some folks are contractors, some folks are just they're just kind of coming in, giving you a piece of data and then going off on their way. And all of this data is part of the ecosystem of what makes up your supply chain. And no better way, I believe, than to have, first and foremost, using, of course, the internet in order to communicate with everybody around the world, but having a technology like blockchain to securely go and transmit that data and communicate that data and collaborate with it. Going back to like your basic 3 tenets of data security, you have the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of your data. The integrity of the data from so many disparate sources of data is like so important that that data is accurate when that was actually going and added to your ledgers, added to your data stores, as well as having that available to everyone around the world, regardless of where they're located or how they're communicating, and then you slap your software on top of that, of course, to go and put in all your business rules and whatnot. But I think that was really a big problem, in any industry with their supply chains, as we saw during COVID over the past year and a half, that folks didn't know really, what was happening, 1, 2, 3 suppliers deep, and they had no knowledge of that or interaction with those folks. So when somebody was shut down 1 or 2 levels deep, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what was happening because there was no traceability in that respect. So all of a sudden everything stops. And I think you still see that in a lot of places going on right now, in areas that are experiencing higher demand because of the effects of all the shifts that have taken place over the last year and a half, as well as the impacts from businesses having to shut down. Now, how do you have that traceability and that repeatability over in that workflow? First and foremost, you have your business rules, which is something that we did with our Materia MX product offering, is build in all the business rules, all the logic for everyone so that they don't have to go and do that and they can concentrate on their business. So that they have these supply chain tools and these the inventory resale tools all centralized for them so they don't have to think about that. But in order to make sure that that data is actually accurate, that there's integrity to that data, as well as to be able to collaborate it into a common data source, that's where we can turn to blockchain in order to go and facilitate that.
And I think that's kind of interesting, Phil, what you just said too, right? Is that's when we turn to it. When we first started looking at this issue of supply chain waste and inefficiency, we didn't necessarily know, at least not at the time years ago, that we were going to be leveraging blockchain as a part of our solution, right? We started Queen of Raw as a marketplace. We were going to match buyers and sellers of this textile waste around the world and really power this resale, reuse, recycling movement globally. But what we learned as we were growing this marketplace globally was that for our consumers, for our buyers and sellers, especially for the larger ones, right? To Phil's point, they didn't always know what they had and what it was made of and where it came from and who it went to and where it sat, right? That's why there's all this waste and inefficiency. And so I think at that point is when we really looked at it and said, I think there's something powerful with blockchain as helping our customers solve a real pain point, a real problem, and help them not just sell this waste today, but actually look at and analyze the data of where this stuff comes from and help them minimize it and do better tomorrow, right? And that's really the goal.
And is that how TextileGenesis came about?
Yeah, so I think it has been a steep learning curve for us. So I would say that blockchain is not a silver bullet for every problem that you would have from the technology perspective. And we are quite realistic, and sometimes people think, right, of blockchain means it's going to solve a lot of problems, right? So I think when someone is applying, it should be very clear what it can do and what it cannot do, right? Now, what it does for us, I can share, and what it does not do for us, I'll also share. So the most important concept that we have, I would say, inspired and borrowed from the whole blockchain is this idea of tokenization, right? That you can create a digital asset which mirrors the physical asset, and as the physical asset moves along the supply chain and undergoes transformation, you can model that on a system, take into account the yield loss, the wastage factor. So in our system, we model about 100 different yield loss and wastage factors depending on which kind of inventory is used to process which kind of output. If you use a carded yarn, open-end yarn, ring spun yarn, now I'm getting a bit technical, but that's the kind of very detailed supply chain modeling we did. And what we did is just created this idea of fiber coin, and we can create, as of now, we have 38 distinct fiber coins or tokens for different sustainable fibers, for Tencel, Lyocell, for Tencel Modal, for EcoVero, for recycled polyesters like Reprieve, Unify, so on and so forth. Also, now we started with US cotton, which has a distinct token on our system, right? So it follows that fibers are close to supply chain. So I think that was a very powerful idea that we could actually borrow from that. But what we also very quickly realized, look, we cannot run our entire technology infrastructure on the pure blockchain itself because it's too expensive, too costly. So we designed the infrastructure in a way that the signature of the transaction and the balance of the transaction sits on the ledger, but a lot of heavy lifting around computations, around business rules, around logic we actually run off the chain just to make it infrastructure also scalable, because a lot of these technologies are still maturing, is what our experience has been. We don't go anywhere close to cryptocurrency, right? People think about blockchain, they say it's cryptocurrency. We have nothing to do with that. It's actually just storing the transaction records in a very reliable, audit-proof way. There's a very strong audit trail. So tomorrow, if a brand or anyone wants to see, you can look back at the audit trail, right? Now, one thing I want to highlight is that one of the things that blockchain does not address is, of course, the quality of data that gets in, right? You still have to work with your suppliers, with your brands, because someone is actually uploading data into the system, which the system is processing. So you have to write some very smart validation rules, very smart algorithms to prevent poor quality data or to catch that poor quality data before it actually gets processed into the system, right? So that's why we've written a lot of business validations to ensure that only high quality data gets in. And also built in a mechanism where we can connect the digital world with the physical world, which means a lot of players like Lensing or Reprieve Unify, they use a tracer, a DNA marker or a tracer in the fiber. So we can integrate with this physical verification. If a textile sample or a fabric sample is picked up and sent to a lab, and it verifies through the DNA that it actually has that fiber, the history of that article on our system will automatically show that a positive audit. And if that fabric is used for 100 garments and supplied to 5 different brands, all of them will automatically see that this product was physically verified, forensically verified, and forensically proven that it actually has indeed the fiber, right? But that's only a sample and risk-based. The entire bulk volume you still track through the platform. Yeah.
You know what? I appreciate everything you said. It's stuff that Phil and I have gone through in our conversations too, about how and when and why to use it, the cost, the carbon emissions, the complexity, of course. What's really funny, though, is when we're actually communicating this to our customers, and we work with, obviously, some of the biggest brands and retailers, Fortune 500 in the world. You know, the fact that we're leveraging blockchain as a piece or part of our software in our marketplace, does that matter? And it's interesting because they get excited hearing it, right? I mean, but at the end of the day, do they understand? Are they at their core a technology-based business? Well, you know, some of them may be, but for the most part, they are creating beautiful fashion garments and selling to their customers. That is their business. They're finished goods and getting it to their customers. Phil spoke about that earlier. And so how much you actually tell them about blockchain, right? At the end of the day, we hope that we've built our solution, and we believe we have, in a way they don't need to worry about the fact that we're using blockchain. We know why we're using it. We know how we're using it. But if you don't have to change your business practices or processes in any way, it integrates into it. It just helps us do what we do better. But none of that is your issue or problem, right? So if we can make it quick and easy, automated, and at scale for them, then it really does make a big difference.
Yeah. And along the lines of what Amit was saying, as well as what Stephanie was saying, you know, like our business is to help folks resell their excess inventory. So we provide all those centralized tools for them to go and resell excess inventory, which is not their main business. That's kind of like an afterthought, you know, whether it's finished goods or whether it's their excess raw materials that they use to create those finished goods. They're just sitting in warehouses collecting dust, costing them money to dispose of. Or we help them either be able to go be able to go and find another use for it within their own company by helping collaborate and share that data, helping them go and sell that on our already established ecosystem and market of buyers and sellers, or to actually go and find a responsible end-of-life solution for it with our suite of partners that we have around the world. And in order to go and communicate that reliably, you know, you need data integrity. And you need a way for folks to collaborate, you know, and again, going back, you know, blockchain is part of that solution for the integrity and the availability of it from a data access layer. But really from the higher presentation layer, of course, and the business logic, there's, you know, that's where all of our software from everybody on this call comes in, where you put in your business roles and you put in your domain expertise in order to go and help folks using blockchain, using their networks to actually go and achieve their end results, which is saving money and selling more better products. And you know, and I think that's really important, you know, that, you know, like you said, you know, blockchain is not necessarily a silver bullet. It's what you do with blockchain that, you know, is really important, and it's really helping folks in our case with that, providing them with this engine to help resell their excess inventory.
And there's a lot of
and quantify it too. I'm sorry, we also quantify it as well, so you can if you're selling stuff, you know, well, what did that mean? You know, how much, what type of environmental impacts were achieved by selling that inventory, which is also really important, of course, and you know, in the last 18 months has been top of mind as well, and more important as rules and regulations change around the world.
Another question that comes up a lot with blockchain too, and we always get asked is, well, what blockchain are you using, right? And it's funny because there's so many interesting and new forks and innovations in blockchain technology. The way Phil architected our solution, it doesn't really matter which one we use. We can use Ethereum or Hyperledger. At the end of the day, for our application and our purpose, it's the underlying benefits that our customers see and how we're applying it that matters. Less which one we use, but it tends to be a question you get a lot is, who are you on? What are you using, right? And be interesting to see where it goes as a technology, if there ends up continuing to be one dominant player, or if it does continue to get democratized and opened up in new ways.
Yeah, I definitely see a world where where use of blockchain becomes more widespread and just baked into like databases. It's like a feature where you turn it on. Do you want blockchain operable on your database, to provide that level of integrity, to provide that additional data layer, maybe with another module. And then, our data and your data and their data is, it's all interchangeable too. I mean, from a sharing perspective, end goal, everybody, you want to have interoperability between different networks and different types of technologies so that everyone can share their data, of course.
Awesome. Yeah, Stephanie, I feel like I could probably turn over the hosting roles to you at this point, because I was just going to ask you about which blockchain do you use. But I feel like, we kind of glossed over the question, but I feel like, to someone listening, maybe who's in the industry, this might be somewhat of interest to them. So, maybe you could talk a little bit about the tech stack and how, if a client or somebody approaches you and, says, what is the right solution here? How you address that and what you're using.
Yeah, well, I'm going to let Phil jump in, but I will say when you ask those questions, right, you have to kind of throw it back on the person too. Well, what benefits are you looking for? Why do you want to use it? And what matters to you most? Because when we're looking at it, right, as we mentioned, there are costs to blockchain. There are carbon emissions with the technology, right? There are different solutions that do better on costs and do better on carbon emissions or integrate quicker and easier, right, into what you're doing. So it really depends on the benefits you're getting. And there's a lot of awesome new technologies. And Amit kind of mentioned it as well, right? Things you do on-chain, things you do off-chain. So a lot of interesting new ways to apply this, but I'll let Phil jump in on the specifics.
So we're built on a fork of Ethereum, and we use proof of authority across with all of our stakeholders. But again, that is not so much important as the business rules that lay on top of the technology. Because the way we built this engine in the middle of our ecosystem, that our marketplace and other marketplaces and channel partners communicate with, together with our suppliers. And it's all about data interoperability. And that's why we built the centralized transaction engine, so that regardless of what technology you're using, maybe you're not on blockchain. Well, how do you communicate with this? Well, you communicate with our API, and then our API will go and write it to the chain. But what about if you're in another chain? Well, okay, we'll go and take that information, and then we'll go and extract the data, transform it, and load it into our chain, and have have an identifier to go back to the other chain with that chain information. So it's not about what flavor is better per se. Some of them they all have their benefits, of course, and if you read some more than others, but it's more about collaboration and data collaboration and helping customers solve their problems.
Yeah. And when we first started looking at this, and it's part of one of the reasons we were talking, right, Amit, like a while ago, what would it look like to be able to communicate with each other with what you're doing and what we're doing, collaborate, partner, integrate, right? And I think that's just the beginning of what we're going to see in this industry happening.
Amit, same question. Do you want to talk a little bit about the tech stack and play here?
Yes. So I think it's similar to what Phil was saying. So we have what we call a core engine, which is more of a transaction engine, which creates transactions between different supply chain players, which creates all those business rules, taking into account the yield loss, the wastage factor, who can ship which product to who. How do you run, are you using the right inventory to make a product? You can't use, for example, a 50-50 tencel cotton yarn to make 100% tensile fabric, because it cannot be done in the physical world, so it cannot be done on the digital platform as well. So a lot of those rules are run on what we call the middleware on the core engine, and we're just launching the version 2.0. And trying to do that, everything in the chain would have been a nightmare, right? So we, as of now, we use IBM's Hyperledger Fabric, where we keep the record of those transactions with the transaction ID and a clear audit trail, of the balance of those tokens. So at the end of the day, every guy's balance of tokens for those different fiber types is actually stored in the chain. But a lot of heavy lifting around business rules, around computations, around identity verification, a lot of that actually happens in our middleware. We're using, some of the latest technologies, is what I would say. Yeah.
Okay. I noticed earlier you mentioned the word cryptocurrency, and you kind of made it sound a little bit like a dirty word. What is your thought on that? I mean, it's in terms of
Yeah. So my intention was not to make it sound like a dirty word. I mean, see, I don't want to make a value judgment, because that's not what we are here about cryptocurrencies. My only point was that it does not make sense to bring a risk into someone's business if they have nothing to do with that business, right? So if we are somehow connected to cryptocurrency and bringing that risk into the business of traceability towards the fashion industry, they have absolutely nothing to do with the cryptocurrency. Anyone on a personal basis can speculate on the market, fine, right? So that's why that's only point what I was trying to make is the tokens we have, these are not publicly traded. There is no monetary value. It's actually digitization of the physical volume, and it doesn't bring any risk into your business, which you would otherwise not have, because I think then the whole purpose is lost, right? So that was the main point I was trying to make, right? And then cryptocurrency, the entire let's say the logic works in a very different way, because you're doing a lot of mining of so-called coins, and that mining process is extremely computationally heavy. There's a lot of carbon impact connected to which we have nothing to do with, right? No one is mining stuff. We're actually storing the data in an immutable way, so that there's a very clear audit trail, and no one can actually fool around with that audit trail, right? So that gives a certain level of surety, but not bringing this additional things that blockchain, or let's say the cryptocurrency world does, but it has very little relevance to our business application, both in terms of mining, in terms of having this very computationally expensive servers, bringing another risk of a volatile currency. I mean, it has absolutely no value for problem we are solving, right? So that's what I meant, right? I mean, I honestly, I don't know, whether cryptocurrency is good or not to invest in. I have no clue, right? So let those guys do what they do. But as far as problem we are solving, I don't think it makes sense to bring those elements of the blockchain into this solution. And that's why I bring only the tokenization aspect and a very strong audit trail aspect. Only those two aspects we bring into our system. Yeah.
Interesting. Phil, Stephanie, are you guys on the same side of the fence, or are some of the aspects of tokenization and NFTs that can be kind of extended beyond like point of sale? Has this, caught your eye at all?
Absolutely. We basically have two types of tokens within our system. We have one for traceability. It can be used for both for marketing and chain of custody, and to look back over, for the authenticity of our goods in our resale inventory. And then we have also one tied over to the actual end user, to their environmental impacts, and that's all contained within our business logic and within our business. We don't go and stray outside that area into currencies or anything of the sort. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a supply chain use case. Yeah.
That's what I'm really excited about, right? Is obviously the work we are all doing here is really valuable for businesses, but how do we also leverage this blockchain technology and connect this awesome stuff and powerful, sustainable and business solutions to the end consumer, to the buyers, to you and me, right? And so that's something that Phil and I've spent a lot of time looking at, and we'll be announcing publicly very soon an initiative we did with MIT to be able to quantify at point of sale for an end consumer the impact, the water, the toxins, the carbon emissions saved by their purchase, right? And making that have meaning, and also having then the story, the record, the proof. I think that is something where it actually puts blockchain right into the palm of someone's hand, and it gives it meaning. It tells them why they had a certain impact. They can trust that they had that impact, record it, and feel good. And that's what we're all looking to do, right? As we go change the world.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So my next question related to this, and we're getting kind of towards the tail end of the webinar here, but I am very curious, the type of clients that you generally work with. I know that Stephanie mentioned earlier, we're talking, Fortune 500 and big ones. I'm curious if, the people really driving this are the really large corporations, or if it's smaller shops who realize that there might be, an advantage gained here by, more of a niche audience seeking sustainable goods. And then kind of a follow-up on that question is, have you noticed since you entered this space, a kind of a change in perception towards blockchain technology in terms of like awareness increasing or no change as well? I don't want to lead you to the answer, but just giving some examples of things you might be seeing.
For us, when we first started this business and looking at this issue of textile waste, we knew that the problem was felt by everybody, right? Every business, every individual who creates something has some form of waste. And how do you monetize it and minimize it? But we knew we had to prove that there was a demand for this stuff, right? We know the supply is out there, but is there demand? So we focused initially on building the community, and really went after actually small and medium-sized brands and individuals to start, showing the masses, students, makers, crafters, quilters, that you could now have digital access to all of these resources readily available at your fingertips, and that these textiles were first-rate, high quality, but at a very significant discount and located where you need them, right? With a sustainable story to tell. So that's how we started. We grew the demand and we grew the marketplace to now over 400,000 users around the world. Once we proved that that demand was there, I think that's when really the big brands and retailers saw the value and recognized this is something we want to participate in, right? So now a big focus of ours, as we've built the demand, we've built the global network and have built up a lot with small, medium size, we really have opened up our software and our tools for the big brands and retailers, because they're the one who are feeling this pain the most, right? The largest volume of waste, it's costing them the most money today. And so by democratizing the software Materium X that we built and giving them access to our solutions and our technologies, we've been able to support the big brands and retailers, the Fortune 500, from fast fashion to luxury haute couture. What's interesting about what we've done too, though, is we've focused on fashion and textiles, because trust me, it's a big enough opportunity, that's for sure. But this applies across industries and around the world, right? This is, even just who uses textiles, automotive, aviation, computer electronics, right? It's the material on your chair, the inside of your car, the carpet under your feet right now. So being able to connect and go into those industries is a big part of where we're growing and going across the world. Oh, and to answer your blockchain question, right? When we first started, we weren't even using blockchain. As we've started using it more, we have started talking more about it. And now in a lot of our presentations, they want to know about it. They don't really want to know the technical side of it, but what does it do for them? What's the benefits? And that's what's been really exciting to articulate and convey, and part of why we added that consumer-facing connectivity to the story. So it helps with their brand loyalty and get more customers while being on the blockchain and doing good.
Awesome.
Right. So I think our experience is quite similar. So I think most of the thrust we see is with large global brands. I think part of the reason is they have a lot of, I think, investment capacity and resource capacity to actually put resources behind to drive the real scalability, right? Because some of these things require a lot of local support, regional support, corporate support. And I think a mid-size and a small-size brand, it becomes too much of a stretch, is what we have seen in the pilots. And also, especially in the beginning, they may not have that much influence on the supply chain or influence on the suppliers, right? A large brand or global retailer has significant more influence and impact on the supply chain, right? So that's where we see a lot of strong traction, but we want to work our way, of course, and serve, let's say, the emerging stars or sustainability champions, which might be regional focused or country focused. I think they are also quite important because they can move very fast. I'm on the positive side. Yeah. Then in terms of, I think, of course, it intrigues a customer when they hear blockchain. How are we applying that technology? For them, it's most important is, look, can it help solve my business problem in a reliable manner, in a robust manner, and in a timely manner, and doesn't charge me a bomb, right? I mean, that's more or less what they truly care about, right? Now, whether you use blockchain or whether you use 10 other technologies, okay, good to know. But the core is, of course, always, is it solving my core business problem in a meaningful manner, right? So we always talk about, this is how we always talk about the problem we are solving. How are we solving the problem? And guess what? This is one of the building blocks in that solution space that we have. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome.
Phil,
go ahead.
When we first started doing this, I think a lot of folks were like, "Oh, cool, blockchain," and like everyone was trying to do it themselves. Right. Which, like Amit was saying, core business, what's your core business and what are you trying to go and accomplish? So everyone was like, oh, blockchain. Oh, yeah, we're doing blockchain and we're doing, but, and it was very local. So solving a problem locally just for themselves using blockchain, which is, kind of like not the whole, underlying, like, the actual essence of the technology is not about keeping it closed, right? It's about the collaboration. So that has kind of like teetered off a little bit now, and folks are starting to look globally more and say, okay, well, coming back to us now and saying, hey, so you guys had some blockchain technology that you're using, like, can you give us an update? We've been able to actually come back to the table with them and show them and say, hey, look, yeah, this is a global problem, and we have a global network of global individuals from all different walks of life and all different parts of the supply chain, and we have the centralized engine to help everybody work together. Going back to well, which blockchain technology is better? It's like, no, it's like, how do we get people to work together to get a bigger, fuller, clearer picture of the data while maintaining the integrity of that data? So like now it's gotten to that point where folks are like, oh, okay, let's hear about your technology. Doing it just, in a little microcosm world doesn't really work because it's a global problem and they need the global data and the global stakeholders.
Excellent. All right, I think we have about 5 minutes left. So it'd be great if we could reflect a little bit. I always like to finish by talking about the future roadmap. And how you see this industry changing, and then what role you want your own company and maybe your individual self to play in shaping that future. So I guess I'll open this one up to anyone who wants to jump in first.
I mean, for us in our business and what we do, we know what we do well, right? We are a resale, reuse, recycling engine and hub so that companies can start circularity today and automate and scale it and grow for the businesses of tomorrow, right? And the supply chain of tomorrow. As I kind of mentioned, we have focused very much on fashion and textiles. As we grow and as we expand, what does it look like to democratize access to our technologies across industries and around the world? And that's where, to Phil's point about people connecting and different stakeholders collaborating, what does it look like to go beyond just fashion, right? Beyond just textiles as one raw material category, where everyone can reuse, recycle, resell with each other in this global interconnected community. Kind of, we jokingly call it an Alibaba or Amazon done right? With trust, transparency, sustainability, quality, curation at its core. And I think we want to build the technology of the future for the supply chain of the future so that everybody can do better, right? And on a personal level, why I do what I do, I want my children to have clean water to drink, clothes that aren't toxic to wear, and a planet to live on. And I know that this is a key part in making that happen, and we're not stopping until we do.
Great answer. Phil, anything you wanted to add there?
I think Stephanie said it perfect there. Yeah.
Okay. Amit?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is about the future roadmap, right, Ben?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we see significant opportunities as we move ahead. I think the one strong opportunity we see is actually overlaying a carbon traceability impact on top of product traceability, right? Because a lot of brands use an LCA number, a life cycle assessment, which is kind of an average of an average of an average, and you really don't know what you're looking at, right? Because you have one number for denim, let's say 20 kgs of CO2, and you multiply by 10 or 20 million denims that you buy, and then you say, this is my CO2 for my entire denim collections. But that number could be 70 or sometimes even 100% of the actual real impact, right? And once you have the underlying product traceability, you can be significantly more accurate around carbon impact. So I think that's one. What we're also launching just in 2 months, the version 2.0 that I mentioned earlier with Textile Exchange, where a lot of the industry standards would be run on our system, right? So majority of the brands, they use GRS, RCS for recycled materials, where right now you have PDF or paper-based transaction certificates, and we are not digitizing those certificates, we are eliminating them to create fully a digital chain of custody using our system. So I think it's very, very exciting times ahead, but still a long way to go, because what we are trying to achieve is a real transformation. I think sometimes brands feel that, look, you come in and you turn a switch on, and 3 months, voila, you have the whole traceability of your collections. And then you have to bring the painful message, it's not going to happen, right? This is a real transformation for your business, for them to understand how traceability works. It's a real transformation for your supply chain to be engaged in a system, to be able to share data systematically, and to actually, in a way, change their way of working. So I think for me, it's a real transformation that takes, for any large business, at least 18 to 24 months to really make a real impact across the supply chain. Yeah. So, great times ahead, and I look forward to collaborating also with Stephanie and Phil as we continue to kind of change the industry curve. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I would like to thank you all for joining us today and sharing your story and sharing the vision. I think it's a very important one, and something that, it's not going to go away. And so, like we've seen with the unique geopolitical situations that are unfolding now, it's becoming more and more accelerated, this need. So we'll probably be having some conversations again in the future, and I look forward to that. Thank you all for joining, and have a nice day or have a nice night.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.